The night was quiet, but not empty. A circle of lights hung above the ring, and the crowd hummed with a strange energy that felt both dangerous and electric. The cameras were ready. The announcers whispered to each other, and every person in that arena knew something unusual was about to happen. Mike Tyson had arrived, not in the past glory of heavyweight championships, but in the present weight of his legend. Across from him, sitting calm with almost no expression, was Keanu Reeves. People did not expect Keanu to be there. They thought of him as an actor, a man who played fighters on screen, not a man who stepped into the raw air of a real fight. And yet here he was, silent, watching, waiting. The story began not with fists, but with words. Tyson had called Keanu just a kicker, nothing more. He had laughed in an interview saying, "He can kick in movies, but this is real life. This is different." The words spread fast. Online clips carried the tone of mockery. People argued in comments. Was Keanu just a movie fighter, or did he carry something deeper inside him? Keanu heard the words, but he did not answer. He had never lived his life chasing arguments. He lived with patience, with humility, with silence that made people wonder what storms existed behind his eyes. What pulled Keanu into the ring was not anger. It was not pride. It was something older, something quieter. He had known pain, real pain, and it had taught him that respect was worth more than fame. People who mocked often carried their own wounds. But still, there are moments when silence becomes agreement, and in those moments, one must stand. Keanu agreed to face Tyson not for victory, but to prove that the human spirit is not defined by public labels. As he trained, his body remembered the years of practice, the endless hours of martial arts behind movie sets, the real masters who had taught him discipline, not for cameras, but for life. He practiced in an empty gym, long after others had gone home, moving through patterns again and again until sweat covered the floor. Each motion was a memory, each strike a reminder of lessons whispered by teachers who told him that fighting is never about destruction. It is about self-control, about truth. The media, of course, wanted a spectacle. They wrote headlines full of fire. Tyson versus Reeves, the lion against the actor. They wanted blood, shock, chaos. They wanted people glued to their screens waiting for disaster. But in Keanu's eyes there was no fire of spectacle. There was only calm. Friends asked him, "Why do this? You don't need to prove anything." He would smile gently, a half smile, the kind that never reached arrogance. He would say, "Sometimes we need to meet challenges not to win, but to honor ourselves." The night of the event, as he walked toward the ring, the crowd shouted louder than ever. Some cheered his name, some laughed, some called him foolish. But every voice became distant in his mind. He walked slowly, breathing deeply, each step a meditation. Tyson stood already inside, a figure of raw power, his muscles carved by years of dominance. When their eyes met, there was no hatred, only a strange recognition, as if both men understood this was not about violence, but about proving a truth to the world. The announcer's voice echoed, and the bell rang. In the first moments, Tyson came forward like a storm. His fists cut the air with speed that frightened even the cameras. Keanu did not strike back. He moved, stepping aside, deflecting, letting the storm pass. People in the crowd grew restless. Some shouted that he was afraid. But those who looked closely saw the control, the balance, the stillness in his breathing. Then came the moment. Tyson threw a punch meant to end the doubt, a blow filled with years of reputation. Keanu shifted, just enough, and in that space of one heartbeat, he answered. Not with anger, not with wildness, but with a single kick, precise, sharp, placed with the calm of a man who had studied not for show but for truth. The sound of impact silenced the crowd. Tyson staggered, his eyes wide with shock. The giant who had called him just a kicker had felt what it meant to meet years of hidden discipline. The crowd roared. Some stood in disbelief. Others screamed. Cameras flashed. And in that silence that follows chaos, Keanu did not raise his hands, did not shout in triumph. He simply stepped back, lowered his guard, and waited. His respect for Tyson remained, even in that moment of power. And that respect was what people felt most. It was not victory that struck them. It was the humility that followed it. But the story was not finished. As Tyson steadied himself, his eyes locked onto Keanu's, and something shifted. The anger melted, replaced by recognition. He nodded once, a gesture heavy with meaning, as if to say, "I see you now." This was the beginning, not the end. For what followed was not a fight of destruction, but a journey of two men. One with the power of the past, one with the silence of the present, teaching the world what respect, humility, and resilience truly mean. The sound of that single kick still echoed in the arena hours later. People who had witnessed it could not let it go. It was not just the strike, it was the silence that followed. The way Keanu did not chase glory, but instead lowered his guard with calm eyes. Reporters outside the stadium struggled to put the moment into words. Some said it was luck, others called it discipline. But everyone agreed on one thing. Something rare had happened in that ring. Keanu left the arena quietly. No big celebrations, no interviews filled with shouting. He stepped into the night with his head lowered, carrying a stillness that felt heavier than victory. A friend who walked beside him asked, "Why didn't you celebrate? People wanted to see you raise your hands." Keanu only smiled faintly and whispered, "Respect is louder than celebration. I came here to meet a man, not to destroy him." His words carried the heart of who he was, humble, gentle, unwilling to make another man small just to feel big. Yet the world outside was not so gentle. Social media exploded with arguments. One side screamed that Keanu had proven himself. The other side shouted that it was staged, that Tyson had let it happen. Conspiracy videos spread, each one trying to explain away the shock of seeing the legendary fighter stumble from a single kick. The noise grew louder by the hour, and the more it grew, the more Keanu withdrew into silence. But not everyone doubted. There were young fighters watching from around the world who felt a spark ignite in their hearts. They had been told that strength was always measured in loudness, in domination, in fists that crushed. Now they had seen a man who showed another way. A quiet strength, a respectful strength. Gyms filled with whispers of his name. Some young boy in a small village in Brazil tried his first careful kick, saying, "If Keanu can do it, maybe I can too." A girl in a crowded city in India practiced breathing slow, repeating his movements on a cracked rooftop, believing she could find balance in her own storms. Tyson, too, carried that moment in his chest. The days after the fight, he appeared, in interviews with a strange look in his eyes, still proud but softened by something he did not name. Reporters asked him, "Did he surprise you?" He paused, then nodded. "Yeah, he's more than what I said. He's not just a kicker, he's disciplined, he's humble, I respect that." Those words, simple and heavy, began to shift the world's view. Keanu, however, stayed away from cameras. He walked the streets of the city in quiet clothes, unnoticed by most. Sometimes he would stop at small cafes, drink tea, and watch the people around him. He noticed how strangers treated one another, how some rushed past without looking, how others held doors open for each other. To him, these small acts of kindness mattered more than headlines. Fame was a storm, but humanity was found in these tiny sparks of everyday respect. Then came the twist that no one expected. One evening, as he left a small bookstore, a man stepped forward with a trembling voice. He said, "My son saw you in that fight. He has been sick for years and he had given up hope. But after watching you, he started practicing little movements again. He said, if someone quiet like you can stand in front of the world, maybe he can stand in front of his illness." Tears rolled down the father's face as he whispered, "Thank you." Keanu placed his hand gently on the man's shoulder and said only, "Tell him he already has strength. He doesn't need the world to believe it, only himself." Stories like this began to spread. People who had lost faith in themselves started to feel something again. And while the noise of critics still screamed in corners of the internet, a softer, deeper sound began to rise. Hope. But peace does not last long in a world that feeds on spectacle. Promoters saw what had happened and smelled opportunity. They began to plan, to push, to build a rematch that would promise even more drama, even more fire. Whispers reached Keanu. They wanted him back in the ring, this time not just against Tyson, but against others. They wanted to make him a symbol, a product, a headline machine. And here was the conflict. Keanu had never wanted to be a weapon for entertainment. He had stepped into that ring for respect, for humility, not for profit. Yet now he faced a decision that could shape more than just himself. If he stepped back, people would say he was afraid. If he stepped forward, he risked being swallowed by the machine of spectacle he despised. In his small apartment that night, he sat alone, staring out at the city lights. His mind went back to moments of his life filled with loss, with grief, with love that had slipped away. He thought of how fragile life was, how quickly it could vanish, and how important it was to spend it with honesty. He whispered to himself, "What do I stand for?" The question echoed in the silence of his room. Days later, he gave an answer, not to the media, not to promoters, but to a group of young martial artists at a community center. He visited them quietly without announcement and trained with them, showing them balance, breath, and focus. When one boy asked if he would fight again, Keanu looked at him and said, "The real fight is not in the ring. The real fight is to stay kind in a world that wants to make you cruel." The children listened wide-eyed, and in that moment, Keanu found his choice. He would not fight for money. He would fight for meaning. But meaning often calls for sacrifice. And soon he would discover that standing for humility would draw enemies more dangerous than fists. The promoters did not like his refusal. And in the shadows, plans began to form. Plans to break his calm, to test his resilience, to force him into a battle not just of the body, but of the soul. The city carried on with its noise, cars rushing, voices rising, screens glowing in every corner. But inside Keanu's world, the silence grew heavier. The promoters had not taken his refusal with peace. They were men who lived on spectacle, who fed on money and noise, and they did not understand humility. To them, Keanu's silence was rebellion, and rebellion had to be crushed. At first, the pressure came through the media. Sudden articles appeared, headlines written with sharp edges. Keanu hides behind excuses. Was the kick just a trick? Hollywood actor refuses to prove himself again. The word spread quickly, and people who had once cheered began to doubt. This was how the promoters worked, turning respect into suspicion, turning patience into weakness. But Keanu did not fight words with words. Instead, he spent his days visiting small dojos, training with children, speaking to them about patience, respect, and kindness. He told them that winning is not about standing over someone, it is about standing with yourself. Yet even as he shared these lessons, he felt the shadows closing in. One night, as he walked home from the community center, a car slowed beside him. The window rolled down and a voice spoke. "You think you can walk away from this? The world is waiting for your rematch. You can't just disappear." Keanu turned his head, but he did not answer. The car rolled on, leaving only fumes and tension behind. The next morning, his phone lit up with hundreds of messages. Someone had leaked false stories, claims that he had insulted Tyson, that he had mocked fighters in private, that he believed he was untouchable. None of it was true, but in the world of headlines, truth mattered less than drama. And yet, through the storm, something remarkable happened. Mike Tyson himself called him. The voice on the line was rough, heavy, but strangely gentle. "Keanu," he said, "I know what's going on. I know you didn't say those things. These people want to use us. They want a circus." Keanu stayed silent for a moment, then answered softly, "Respect isn't found in a circus. It's found in the way we look at each other when the crowd is gone." There was quiet on the line. Then Tyson laughed, a tired laugh, and said, "Maybe we're both learning something here." That call changed something. The promoters had expected Tyson to push for another fight, but instead he grew distant from their plans. Their grip began to slip, and anger turned sharper. Now they wanted to break Keanu in another way. Not just with lies, but with fear. Days later, at a small training hall, Keanu noticed two strangers watching from the doorway. Their eyes followed his every move, but when he approached, they vanished into the street. That night, someone left a note under his door. It read, "If you don't give the people what they want, we'll make sure you lose everything you care about." For a man like Keanu, who had already lost so much in his life, family, love, years of quiet grief, the threat carried no easy weight. But he did care. He cared for the children he trained, for the strangers who whispered that his story gave them hope, for the simple humanity that he believed still existed in a world hungry for chaos. And it was these connections that the shadows wanted to cut. Instead of hiding, Keanu chose a different path. He called a press gathering, something he rarely did. When the cameras lit up, people expected him to defend himself with anger. Instead, he spoke with calm honesty. "I never entered the ring for money," he said. "I never struck a man for applause. I came because respect matters. If I fight again, it will not be because of pressure or fear. It will be because the fight itself carries meaning. Until then, I choose silence." The words spread faster than the lies. Millions watched the clip online. Some mocked, some doubted, but many felt something stir inside. They saw a man who refused to bend to money or fear. They saw resilience in its quietest form. But the promoters were not finished. That same night, the community center where Keanu had been training children was broken into. Equipment smashed, walls painted with cruel words. When Keanu arrived the next morning, the children stood outside, frightened, their small hands gripping each other. He walked through the broken glass, slowly, then turned to them and said, "Walls can be broken, but not our spirit. We will train outside. Under the sky, no one can cage us." And so they did. In the park, on the concrete, in open spaces where strangers stopped to watch, Keanu continued. His presence became a quiet protest, a living example that kindness does not fall when attacked. Instead, it grows. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. The shadows would strike harder next time. The test ahead would not only be of his body, but of his heart. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the pull of destiny. The true fight had not yet begun. The broken community center became a symbol. Where there had once been walls and windows, now there was only shattered glass and silence. But outside, under the open sky, life returned. Every evening, children gathered with bare feet on the grass, forming circles as Keanu moved among them. He showed them how to balance, how to breathe, how to step not with anger but with patience. People walking by would stop, drawn to the sight of this quiet man teaching children with the same focus he had once shown in front of the world's cameras. The media tried to twist it. Some outlets mocked him, saying, "Actor plays teacher," in the park, as though kindness was a role he could shed. But others felt the truth. Videos of Keanu training children under the sky spread quickly. Viewers watched the children laughing, learning, falling, standing again. They saw the way Keanu bent down to their level, speaking softly, never raising his voice. And in that simple image, people saw a strength more real than any headline fight could ever offer. But the shadows did not rest. The promoters, furious that their plans were slipping away, decided to strike deeper. One morning, Keanu received another note, slipped under his door. It read, "This is not about you anymore. It's about the people you touch. Stop or watch them suffer." The handwriting was sharp, almost carved into the paper. Keanu read it slowly, his face calm. But inside his chest, the weight grew heavy. Later that week, as the children trained in the park, a group of men appeared at the edge of the field. They were not there to learn. They shouted, mocked, trying to break the peace. One of them pushed a boy who had been practicing. The child stumbled and the group laughed. Keanu stepped forward, not fast, not with rage, but with the kind of quiet presence that froze the air. He stood between the children and the men, his voice steady. "If you came for a fight, you will not find it here. Leave." The men laughed, circling him. One threw a punch, wild and angry. In that moment, Keanu moved. Not with the flash of a movie, not with the fury of spectacle, but with the precision of years of discipline. He blocked, stepped aside, redirected. Within seconds, the men were on the ground groaning, not injured but disarmed, their power stripped away by calm skill. The children stared in silence, their eyes wide. Keanu looked at the men and said, "Strength without respect is weakness. Do not come here again." They stumbled away, muttering, but something in his voice followed them into the night. The next day, news spread of the incident. Some called him a hero. Others accused him of staging the event for attention. The noise grew louder. But among the noise, a different voice rose. Mike Tyson spoke again, this time on live television. "I know what it's like to be pushed into the circus," he said. "But what Keanu is showing right now, that's not fake. That's real strength. I respect it." Those words carried weight, heavy enough to quiet some of the critics, and for the first time since their fight, people began to see not a rivalry but a strange alliance between the two men. Yet the promoters grew more desperate. They had invested too much, and they would not allow humility to defeat spectacle. They began planning something larger, something that would force Keanu into the spotlight no matter his will. Whispers spread of a massive event, a staged, accidental encounter, where Keanu would be trapped in a public confrontation, too big to ignore. Keanu sensed it coming. At night, he sat alone by his window, the city lights flickering in the glass. He thought of the children, of the father who had thanked him outside the bookstore, of the sick boy who had begun moving again. He thought of his own losses, the griefs that had carved silence into his soul, and he realized something. The battle ahead was no longer about him. It was about everyone who believed kindness could survive in a world built on noise. The pressure built until, one evening, when Keanu attended a quiet charity dinner for a local hospital, he thought it would be safe, away from the circus. But halfway through the night, the doors opened, and in walked the promoters with cameras, lights, and a crowd. They had staged it perfectly. A microphone was thrust toward him. "Keanu," a reporter shouted, "are you ready to prove yourself in the ring again, or are you hiding behind children in silence?" The room froze. Every eye turned to him. It was the trap they had built, the moment designed to humiliate him, to force him into a decision that would feed their spectacle. Keanu stood slowly, adjusting his jacket. His face was calm, his eyes steady, but inside his heart raced. This was the test. This was the moment where respect, humility, and resilience would be weighed against the hunger of the world. He took the microphone. The cameras leaned in. The crowd held its breath. "The fight you want is not mine," he said softly. "The fight is against greed, against cruelty, against the belief that strength is measured in how loudly you shout. If you want me in a ring, again, it will not be for your profit. It will be for something greater." The words spread across the room like fire. Some people cheered, some jeered. The promoters clenched their jaws, their plans beginning to crack. But Keanu knew this was only the beginning. The real storm was still ahead, and it would demand more of him than any fight ever had. After that night at the charity dinner, the world seemed to split in two. One half wanted to see Keanu dragged back into the ring, shouting for a fight that would satisfy their hunger for spectacle. The other half, quieter but growing, wanted to see him remain exactly as he was, a man who stood for respect and humility in a world that often forgot those values. The tension became a storm that filled every headline, every online debate, every conversation between strangers. Keanu walked through it like a man moving through heavy rain. He felt the noise pressing against him, but he refused to bend. Still, he knew the promoters would not stop. Their pride had been wounded, and men who live only for pride are the most dangerous of all. Mike Tyson became an unexpected ally. One evening, as the noise reached its peak, Keanu received another call. This time, Tyson's voice was heavier, carrying something almost protective. "Listen, man," Tyson said. "They're setting up something big, bigger than before. They're trying to use my name again, and they want you cornered. I don't like it. I know what it feels like to be used. I won't stand by and let it happen to you." Keanu listened, silent for a long time. Then he said, Thank you. I never wanted this to be about war. But if the storm comes, maybe it's not about stopping it. Maybe it's about standing in it so others can see it's possible. Tyson chuckled softly, though the laugh carried sadness. You're a strange guy, Keanu. But I respect you. The storm arrived sooner than either of them expected. The promoters announced a grand event not with Keanu's approval, but with his name plastered everywhere. Posters filled cities. Reeves versus the world. Videos spread, promising a fight no one should miss. And then came the twist. On the stage of the announcement stood not only promoters but other fighters, some legends, some new, all speaking as though Keanu had already agreed to face them. It was a public trap, designed to corner him. The pressure became unbearable. Strangers shouted at him on the street, "When are you fighting?" Reporters camped outside his door. Even friends began to worry, asking if he should just step into the ring to make it all stop. But Keanu's answer was always the same. A fight without meaning is just noise. I will not live for noise. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon, as he trained quietly with the children in the park, a crowd of cameras appeared. They pushed close, surrounding the group, shouting questions. The children grew frightened. Some began to cry. Keanu raised his hands and asked them to stop, but the reporters only pressed harder. One boy dropped his practice stick and whispered, "Why are they angry at you?" Keanu knelt down, placing a hand on his shoulder. Because the world sometimes fears what it cannot control. But remember, you are stronger than fear. That image, a frightened child with Keanu's calm hand on his shoulder, was caught on a camera and spread worldwide. And something unexpected happened. Instead of turning against him, millions of people began to see the truth. Comments flooded the internet. This man is not hiding. He is protecting. This is not weakness. This is strength. The narrative began to shift, and for the first time, the promoters lost control of the story. Furious, they planned one final move. They announced that Tyson himself had challenged Keanu to a public exhibition, claiming it would be the ultimate test of respect. Keanu knew immediately that this was a lie. Tyson had never agreed. But the posters, the tickets, the cameras were already in motion. People believed it. And now the world looked at him, waiting for an answer. He could not stay silent. He met Tyson in a quiet gym one night, away from cameras. The two men stood facing each other in the dim light, the sound of their breathing filling the space. "They're using us," Keanu said softly. Tyson nodded, his eyes heavy. "Then maybe we use them back," Tyson answered. "Maybe we show the world something they don't expect." Keanu tilted his head, curious. Tyson stepped closer. "They want violence. Let's give them respect. They want anger. Let's give them humility. We step into their stage, but we turn it into something else. Not a fight for them, but a lesson for everyone watching." For the first time in weeks, Keanu smiled fully, a real smile, the kind that carried warmth. "Yes," he whispered. "A lesson." The plan was set. The date was already chosen by the promoters, and they thought they were in control. What they did not know was that Keanu and Tyson would step into that ring not as enemies, but as teachers. The cameras would still roll. The crowd would still roar, but the world would not see the chaos the promoters expected. They would see something different, something that might change them. But even as the plan formed, Keanu knew the risk. The shadows would not surrender easily. There would be twists, betrayals, forces working to tear the lesson apart. And as the date drew near, the air grew heavy, charged with suspense. The stage was set. The world waited. Two men stood ready, not for battle, but for truth. The night of the event arrived, and the city pulsed with energy. Banners hung from buildings, screens lit up every corner, and the streets outside the arena swelled with people chanting, debating, arguing. Inside, the ring gleamed under harsh lights, surrounded by cameras waiting to catch every detail. The promoters walked with wide smiles, certain they had finally trapped Keanu Reeves into giving them the spectacle they craved. But behind the curtain, in the quiet before the storm, Keanu and Mike Tyson stood together. There was no anger between them, no rivalry. Instead, there was respect, heavy and clear, like the air before rain. Tyson looked at him and said, "The world expects war. Let's give them something greater." Keanu nodded, his calm eyes carrying a depth that words could not touch. The announcer's voice thundered, calling their names. The crowd roared, some in excitement, others in disbelief. Keanu stepped into the ring slowly, each movement steady, like a man walking into sacred ground. Tyson followed, his presence heavy with history, his face unreadable. The camera zoomed in, desperate to capture tension, to feed the fire of expectation. The bell rang. The sound cut through the arena, sharp and final. The crowd rose to their feet, waiting for violence. Tyson moved first, his fists raised, his body still carrying the speed of a storm. Keanu lifted his guard, ready. For a moment it looked as if the world would see the fight it demanded. Then it happened. Tyson threw the first strike. Powerful, fast, but instead of answering with a counter, Keanu stepped aside, lowered his hands and bowed his head. The crowd gasped. Some shouted in confusion. Tyson paused, then lowered his own fists and bowed back. The cameras caught it all. The silence, the respect, the refusal to perform cruelty for entertainment. But the promoters panicked. They shouted from the sidelines, waving for the fight to continue. They wanted blood, not bows. One of them even jumped into the ring, yelling, "You're ruining this! Fight!" The crowd, restless and confused, began to murmur, torn between anger and awe. Keanu reached for the microphone, his voice calm but strong enough to fill the arena. "The fight you wanted was never real. You wanted two men to destroy each other for your profit. But real strength is not in destroying. Real strength is in respecting. Tonight you will not see enemies, you will see brothers." Tyson took the microphone next, his voice raw and heavy with truth. "I've spent my life in rings. I know what it means to hurt, and I know what it means to be hurt. But tonight, this man showed me something else. You call him just a kicker. I call him a man of respect." The crowd fell into silence, the kind of silence that carries weight. Then, slowly, applause began. It started small. A few claps in the back, then spread like fire, until the entire arena shook with the sound. Not the sound of chaos, but the sound of recognition. The promoters were defeated, their faces pale with fury. Their plan for spectacle had been turned into a lesson they could not control. The cameras, still rolling, broadcast the moment to millions around the world. And in homes, cafes, and streets, people watched two men refuse violence and choose respect. In the days that followed, the world could not stop speaking about it. Some still mocked, unable to accept that humility could outshine spectacle. But millions more felt something stir inside them. Stories spread of people choosing patience over anger, kindness over cruelty, silence over noise. Children in parks bowed to each other before playing, whispering that they were training like Keanu. As for Keanu, he disappeared quietly from the spotlight once more. He returned to the small parks, to the children who still waited for him, teaching them balance, breathing, kindness. When one girl asked, "Did you win?" he smiled gently and said, "Winning is not about standing over someone. It's about standing with yourself." Tyson, too, walked away changed. In interviews, he no longer spoke of rivals, but of lessons. That night wasn't about fighting, he said. It was about respect, and respect is what makes a man truly strong. And so the story that began with mockery ended with something greater. Two men, drawn into a storm of greed and noise, chose humility instead. They taught the world that resilience is not about fists, but about holding on to respect when the world demands cruelty. The arena lights faded, the headlines moved on, but the echo of that night remained. An echo that whispered again and again that kindness is not weakness, humility is not silence, and respect is the greatest victory of all.